Hello folks, welcome to another edition of Something to Think About. And today I want to talk about the escalation in deadly force that's being displayed by the domestic terrorists who are protesting and rioting in our cities across the United States. Now, Antifa and BLM are escalating their use of deadly force against law enforcement and citizens, and they've done so with relative impunity so far. Yeah, there have been a few arrests, but for the most part, these guys are getting away with it. They're throwing rocks, bricks, they're shooting commercial-grade fireworks, and now they're shining high-powered lasers into the eyes of individuals. All these things can cause permanent damage, or worse, death. And so far, law enforcement has exhibited great restraint in not retaliating with deadly force, but I fear that will not continue. Eventually, deadly force will be used in response to these mob attacks. Now, this is something that the left, I believe, is hoping for as they repeatedly escalate the level of provocation against law enforcement and citizens. And be assured that when it does occur, these terrorists will release a highly edited video only showing the response, but omitting the actions that initiated that response. And of course, they'll claim that law enforcement or the citizen used deadly force against unarmed and peaceful protesters who were simply exercising their First Amendment right of free speech and peaceful assembly. And of course, that'll be a lie. Now, Garrett Foster learned a harsh lesson when he unwittingly aimed his AK-47 at a driver of a vehicle during a BLM protest in Austin, Texas. What he probably didn't realize is that driver was within his rights to use deadly force to prevent death or serious bodily injury if he reasonably feared such harm. And trust me, having an AK-47 pointed at you is sufficient qualification of reasonable harm to allow that driver to have employed deadly force. Now, I'm surprised that not one Democrat has condemned Foster for having owned and brandished this AK-47. This is the same weapon that Beto O'Rourke wants to seize. Apparently, if it's in the possession of a leftist, it becomes an acceptable means of self-defense and is not a threatening weapon of war, as the Dems, repeatedly state. Recently, the Kenosha police officer who was hit in the head by a brick and knocked unconscious was technically assaulted with a deadly weapon. And of course, a deadly weapon is not limited to a gun or a knife, but anything that has the ability to contribute injury or death to an individual. And again, law enforcement, to their credit, displayed great restraint in not employing deadly force against the perpetrators or perpetrator of this crime. Sadly, folks, our country is at war, and we are at war with terrorists who are supported by the Democratic Party. Not one Democrat has denounced the actions of these terrorists, and that shows their complicity. The enemy has been identified and their intent clearly defined, as have their methods. They have no issue employing deadly force against anyone who opposes them. They are not seeking to negotiate or they're asking for concessions. Instead, they are seeking total destruction and dismantling of our country. Deadly force will eventually have to be met with deadly force. The American public will not allow these terrorists to continually employ and escalate the use of deadly force against our citizens without eventually having the people of our great nation respond in kind and overwhelmingly. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to echo and give me a follow if you haven't already. I will follow you back. If you care to support my efforts, a link to my book will be provided in the comments section. Remember to support our first responders and our troops, and also remember in November to vote red. Take care.